talking about LGBTQ issues tonight, and I'm Robin Suniga, Chair of the Douglas County Democratic Committee. I want to introduce our moderator, Amy McCoy. Amy's been very active in the community here in Douglas County. She's a realtor, and she's been very, very active in attainable housing here in Douglas County. With that, I'm going to let her take it away and introduce our other panelists and start the discussion. We are here tonight at Tito's Lounge in beautiful downtown Douglasville. Please support our local businesses and come out and join us, or come here some other time and join us. So,
well, awesome. Thank you so much, Robin. Appreciate you. Again, I'm Amy McCoy, broker owner of My Hometown Realty Group. And as Robin said, I'm very active in the Douglas County community, and it definitely is surrounding housing issues. So I want to say thank you first to the guests that are coming as I introduce them. We have Manny Racino, who is here on the end, who is currently the president of the LGBTQ Plus Real Estate Alliance locally. And then we have Feroza Saeed, I did say that correct, right? On our national level for the LGBTQ Plus Real Estate Alliance. They will give you a little bit more insight about whom they are, because it is important for you to get to know them. You've probably seen them around the city of Atlanta and possibly throughout Douglas County. So, Manny, why don't you go ahead and introduce yourself?
Thank you so much, Amy. I appreciate being here and being able to kind of share my story, right? It's what we're gonna do. We're at the lounge hanging out. As you said, I am the current president for the LGBTQ Plus Real Estate Alliance here in Atlanta. I am been working now in real estate for a little bit over 11 years. Have seen some incredible stories, and sadly have seen some incredible opportunities that we can learn from. So I am excited to share as much as I can and have a good conversation here.
Awesome.
Yeah.
Feroza.
My name is Feroza Syed. I use she, her, hers pronouns. I'm a local trans activist and advocate. I work at Atlanta Fine Homes Sotheby's International Realty as an associate broker, and I sit on the National Board of Directors for the LGBTQ Real Estate Alliance. Spend my evenings doing a lot of advocacy and activism work, and by day I sell real estate.
Right.
So happy to be here, and thank you to Douglas County for having us.
So it's important to have this conversation. And the reason this evening we actually do have a few of real estate professionals, and as you can see, we're from different boards, not boards, but different companies, from different areas around the city of Atlanta, giving different perspectives to what our communities may see. I focus a lot here on the west side and around Atlanta. Manny, I know you focus a lot in town, perimeter, but I know you stretch outside. And Feroza, she be selling the multi-million-dollar houses, and
Sotheby's is luxury marketing for all price points.
that is very true.
There you go.
But we wanted to be able to open up the conversation tonight to talk about some of the experiences that our clients face in the communities that we represent. Whether how you choose to identify, whether as we're all members of the LGBTQ family. You have what is called allies. If you maybe don't feel that you subscribe, but yet you can understand and you can have that compassion, I think is the best way I can put it, then represent yourself as an ally. And so we're going to open up that conversation, but again, we wanted to say thank you to Tito's Lounge, which is located here at 12353 Veterans Memorial Highway here in Douglas County. Hope you guys will be able to come out tonight. There is food, so those
If y'all could smell these wings, oh my gosh, it smells so good right now.
the food is definitely giving a vibe, yes, of deliciousness. So definitely come out, and again, special thanks to Douglas County Democrats for hosting this evening's discussion. So let's go ahead and dive right in.
Yeah.
Okay, so people in the LGBTQ plus community often face discrimination in housing, okay? New legal protections are being implemented to combat this. So let's talk about the challenges that LGBTQ plus individuals face when seeking affordable housing, and about what policy changes need to be had to improve and protect members of that community. And I know that's a long question. but y'all know we work fast in real estate. So tell me, who'd like to take the first lead on that?
So, I'll specifically, you asked about what things we see, the discrimination that we see. I started out with, there are some incredible things about my journey in real estate, but there's also been some moments where I went, whoa, there are opportunities here. And for me, my realtor origin story, which is what I call it, definitely includes that first question right there. And it's the fact that I started as an investor, so I was very lucky, and I in fact call it privileged enough to have known about the requirements of real estate, what it takes to buy real estate, and then how you can invest in it. And that is a privilege. So when I did that, I started seeing in my transactions, whether I was buying from someone or selling to someone, that there were moments that I went, they don't have the same information I have. They don't have the same type agent that I have. They don't have the same comfort level or, like I said, privilege that I had. So I saw those discrepancies and I knew that there were opportunities there. And for me, I saw a lot of that with my Latino community. But then, of course, you then are growing and maturing, and I go, I see it now in my LGBTQ plus community as well. And that is where there is a lot of kind of work to do, but that stood out for me even from the beginning of my career. Yeah.
So just access to the resource of knowledge, is that what you found being that first step of getting that?
One of many. I mean, the reality is, and this is why these organizations are so important, like the Alliance, is because we get these statistics, right? Sometimes it comes down to who's collecting this info we can study. So the national average of homeownership is about 60%, and we sit right at 49%. So there is that discrepancy there. And in fact, it's very similar to the discrepancy that we see with a lot of our diverse backgrounds and demographics. So just that fact alone really calls to the work and action that is needed, but that is definitely one of them.
Wow. Froza, maybe you can give us a little bit insight of your story.
So when we're talking about legal protections, I want to start off with the fact that it's still legal to discriminate against LGBTQ people in about 27 states. And as Manny's discussed, I don't think that we can have this conversation about housing, fair housing, or equitable housing for all without discussing the history of this country when it comes to redlining, districting, a lack of education, generational wealth, so many things that have built up many marginalized communities, more specifically the Black, Latinx, LGBTQ, Asian populations in this country. So I think that when we're talking about legal protections coming in, and maybe we're discussing Bostwick versus Clayton, and that's 2020, you have to remember that on a federal level, it takes years for things to come down, and that's really based on an executive order. So a lot of states are still, it's very legal to discriminate against people. If we're gonna talk about statistics, and as Manny just said, there's a wide gap between LGBTQ folks and home ownership of cisgender or straight folks. But then there's also an additional, as Manny just said, additional gap that you're adding in for being Black and LGBTQ, brown and LGBTQ, Latinx and being LGBTQ. So those numbers can vary from somewhere between 15 to 30% difference in home ownership. And that doesn't just happen overnight, right? And the legal protections that we're seeing that have just started coming out over the last 3 years are not necessarily enough to help our community bridge the gap that we want to, which is why Manny and I are working so hard in the Alliance to make sure that not just LGBTQ home ownership, but other marginalized communities, we all work together to build that bridge and bridge that gap together collectively. For example, in the trans community, which I represent, the TGX community, 1 in 5 people has encountered discrimination while looking for housing. 1 in 10 has been kicked out of a home for being a trans person. When we don't have those kinds of protections across the country, what are we doing? And when we're looking at LGBTQ folks, specifically LGBTQ folks of color, we're seeing that they don't have the same access to not just housing, healthcare, education, employment. I mean, it's a very wide array of discrimination we're seeing. So,
You know, and I'm so glad that you touched in on that part, because intersectionality plays a major factor when you're looking at how you are creating a diverse community, how you are creating an inclusive community. Because we can't just say, hey, this is a race-based issue. This is multiple different factors of it, whether you identify LGBTQ. And even as you just said, with 27 states, right? Georgia, as a state itself, it does not even have its full protections. We have had to take the steps of doing, different municipalities have had to take that extra step to create those type of agreements in place that they would not allow discrimination.
NDOs, yes.
Yeah, in their areas. And so when we really look at where we are lending that progressive stance to making sure inclusion is definitely at the forefront, it's something you should definitely consider when you're getting ready to cast your ballot. But let me continue on with the questions. You know, the whole point of us having these conversations is so that way you can be informed when you're looking at, when you're ready to cast that ballot, who is actually looking out for your best interests. You know, and so let me lead into the next question. Could you recount a personal or encounter regarding housing instability within the LGBTQ community, and maybe propose community level actions to furnish LGBTQ individuals with greater housing stability?
So I've had multiple clients, and I'll say this, up until about 7 years ago, I was one of the only trans women of color I knew in Atlanta that really owned a home. That's crazy to me.
Yeah.
Over the last 6 to 7 years, I've seen a huge increase in LGBTQ folks, and that's not to say I was kind of undercover, so I wasn't really out all the time in community, but from my limited knowledge of the girls that I knew, it wasn't commonplace. And I think that I've had multiple experiences with folks saying that they didn't have the understanding, the knowledge, or the resources. So I think that one of the things that we can do as real estate professionals is really make sure that when we have clients, you know, there's the churn them and burn them kind of brokerages, right? And none of us belong to any of those kinds of brokerages, but sometimes advocacy and activism looks like finding people who don't have the perfect credit score, who don't have that knowledge, as Manny was saying, and making sure that we're putting in the resources as brokers, specifically people with privilege, socioeconomic privilege, for me, pretty privilege, passing privilege, racial privilege.
I have that pretty privilege too. I feel pretty
so
strong. So
many privileges,
very strong about
yeah, girl, you are pretty. That being said, I think that utilizing the privilege that we have to make sure that we are grabbing our communities, multiple communities, our multiple identities, whether that's women, that's brown folk, that's LGBTQ folk, Latinx folk, and pulling everybody along with us for this ride, because we are, as Manny mentioned and I mentioned, statistically far beyond what we see in the cisgender, straight, white, and white LGBTQ community when it comes to home ownership numbers. So I think that it's very important for people who are looking to make that change in their life to find people who identify with them in one of their intersections, and making sure that that person not only has the qualifications and the experience like Manny or you or I have to help them, but making sure that that person has the capacity and the drive to do so, which is why I think all three of us sitting on this sofa are so successful, not just from a business perspective, but from an advocacy perspective, because we really put our communities first as far as making sure that we're making the changes. And you have to commit. Sometimes that's not a 30-day deal. That's a 6 months of working with somebody, a year, 2 years of working with somebody, making sure that people have the resources and understanding to be able to change their lives.
Absolutely. Manny, would you like to expand on that?
Yeah, I'm very lucky that I'm sitting here with the two of you, because we're all friends. We know how hard we work in this community. So we're gonna keep it real. We're bringing this in. I'm just gonna be honest with y'all. It's the only way I can be. And I'll tell you, I'm gonna use myself as that example. I, in a previous life, was married, and we decided to sell our house. And we had a very interesting, colorful conversation with my partner at the time because we had to decide how we were going to list our house now that we have wedding photos around. That is a conversation that a lot of people don't have to have. But I already knew about real estate. I already knew about some of the disadvantages. I already knew there's not pretty side of it. And because of that, I was afraid. How would I feel if I put myself in the shoes of someone that already lives in that fear, right? Who's afraid to tell their lender, for example, where they spend their money, or for a homeowner to figure out, before I call this agent, should I take all the stuff out, right? So when we talk about what we can do, even in our communities, when you choose a real estate agent, make sure that they know, that you know, you're interviewing them, that they are going to be someone that works with you, that's comfortable with you. And I will say the boards and being a realtor is important to that too, because the way that we don't have some protections in the state, being part of a realtor board means that you are committed to these, to uphold these values.
That's right. So one of the things that what he's specifying on is we've updated our code of ethics that we are adding to our code of ethics the extra protections. So you do have the Fair Housing Act, but does not extend the protections of sexual identification.
Identity, orientation, gender.
And so we're taking that extra step to making sure that we represent all. And you'll want to work with someone who has that same feeling, who's going to make sure they're protecting your stake for the community at hand.
Your values,
yeah.
who you are.
Because at the end of the day, once you say yes to the address, that's where your voting card goes to.
There you go.
That is
Absolutely.
who you find out who's going to represent you as your commissioner, or who you're going to find that represents you as your city council member. That is who you're going to find that's going to represent you on a congressional level, and eventually the President of the United States. So it's important that making sure that when you decide to choose a community of residents, that you feel protected. You feel like those people are going to have your best interest in heart. So again, I want to say we're here at Tito's Lounge in Douglasville, and we hope that you'll be able to come out. We have food in the room. We have people already drinking and being merry. But most importantly, we want to thank Douglas County Democrats for giving us this opportunity, this platform to be able to express with you some of the challenges and privileges within the LGBTQ community and the work that we're doing to expand those opportunities. So, moving forward, to what extent, and I know we're more in real estate, so let's set that preface there, right?
Yep.
We may not be subject matter experts within the healthcare industry. We may not be experts within the education sector of things, right? Or even the financial institution. What these questions that I ask you, all that I ask is that you just give me what your knowledge is. I've been in real estate 19 years, so I've got a little bit of probably better than the average, agent that's been less than 5 years, right? Mm-hmm. But share with what you can expand on. So, what extent are educational institutions adequately aiding the LGBTQ youth? Maybe you can speak from a perspective on clients that you have worked with. Do you feel like they are, are you finding that they're grappling with issues of housing insecurities, or are they enhancing more opportunities for the LGBTQ youth? Give me what your thoughts are to that.
So I think that you can't really have this conversation without having a greater conversation around society. And when we look at LGBTQ youth make up the vast majority of the houseless, the unhoused population, or if you want to call them homeless. in America. About 40 to 60% of people in that, of youth in that community happen to identify as LGBTQ. So we can't have these conversations without having greater conversations around why are LGBTQ kids being thrown out of their homes to begin with, right? And how does that then affect their housing instability, their access to education, their access to healthcare, and everything else. I think we have a greater societal concern regarding why we think that the lives of LGBTQ children are dispensable, and that's completely unacceptable. That said, I think that, as I mentioned a little bit earlier, when we're looking at what's happening around all of our community, but more specifically within the Black and brown LGBTQ community, those communities are further marginalized in comparison to our white siblings, right? And these conversations regarding accessibility for youth, when I was working, for example, with the Trans Housing Coalition here in Atlanta on their board, we were finding that the vast majority of people that we were servicing were youth, and by youth I'm saying 25 and under, and happen to be TGX, trans or gender expansive, and women of color, right? So when we think about not just education, again, I find myself feeling like I will be repeating this again and again throughout our conversation today. We cannot address the issues, one issue without one other in the hand. For example, your access to education will often have a requirement for an address, a legal name that matches either your identity. You can't talk about access to education without access to employment. How do you pay for your school bills? Do you just get completely in debt for the rest of your life, which then changes your accessibility to home ownership later, right? And when you don't even have the basics, you don't have a home, you don't have an address, and you have no other way of doing that. In order to change your name, you have to have an address. Yes. So these things kind of build upon one another, and I guess there's a place to start with everything, right? But it is an all-encompassing umbrella of societal issues that lead to every single thing that we'll probably end up talking about today.
Okay. What you got, Manny?
So I get wrapped up in what Feroza says, and I agree with all of it. Can you repeat? I think I remember exactly how to answer this, but give me the.
So what extent are educational institutions adequately aiding our LGBTQ youth?
Gotcha.
Do you feel like it's going far enough for them?
Yeah. So what I was going to say is I think our educational institutions are probably trying to do their best, right? What I will point to is it is the work that you do, depending on your profession, where you volunteer, how you volunteer, that I think really picks up a lot of the slack sometimes. And that's why the ballot is your tool, right? Because that is how we change things. But sometimes that progress, as was mentioned earlier, takes a while. So for us, the current example I can think of are the organizations like the Alliance, the outreach that other organizations do, nonprofits within Atlanta, that do work hard to make education happen, to make health resource happen, all of these things, right? But these organizations are important. So whether it's a charitable donation you do or a time that you volunteer, that is where I think there is a lot of opportunity to make that change. And one of them I will say is, we, with these organizations, we are giving people a resource, a light at the end of a tunnel that they never see. Because I had, for example, from my alma mater, a young gentleman that reached out to me and graduated early because he wanted to be done with that phase of life. But he knew things were better. He knew that there are opportunities. He knew there are organizations and educational things that existed outside of that bubble that he lived in, and he wanted to get to those quicker. It's a weird feeling for me to sit there and hear that because I'm proud of him. At the same time, I'm thinking, you missed out on a year of, you're being forced to grow up, right? And there's so many stories of these, but this example, to answer that question, is these organizations, I think, are standing out today.
Yeah.
And that's great. And we hope education systems and these resources will keep getting more funding and will keep getting the attention they need. But again, that comes down to the vote and the time.
I will take it back to voting and the importance of voting, as Manny is saying, because for me, for example, you look at Florida and what's happening in Florida right now, which is Texas and Florida have led this campaign of hate around the nation. And when we're talking about education systems, when we're banning books, right, that talk about being black, critical race theory, LGBTQ folks, gender identity, and erasure of all of our communities, when you're electing people and you're going out and making sure you're putting in your ballot, finding people who align with education, with not banning books, with reading, in those ways, I think we can change things. Making sure that there are several states that have protections for LGBTQ kids who have gender identity, allowing them to use the bathroom of their choice, or gender neutral bathrooms, for example, whereas we're in Georgia or Texas, we're seeing legislation completely against SB 88, SB 140, trans kids not being able to play sports with their gender. So I think that what's important for the people that are watching or people who are voting in Douglas County and around the country is to make sure that you find people that you can vote for to whom these things matter, right? And who are not being swayed. That said, I did understand the question, because I think I kind of went on the negative side. So I'm going to say where there's some things that are positive. I have personally, in my circle of younger LGBTQ kids of South Asian descent, I'm like the queer auntie, DC auntie of LGBTQ Indian folks here. One that's graduated from Harvard, one that's graduating from Emory, one that's the first trans male doctor, to my knowledge, graduating in the country from Morehouse, right? So there's a lot of opportunity, and clap clap for the fact that our community is getting more accessibility, and that we're seeing a lot of institutions, specifically Morehouse, I think Spelman did too, when it comes to Black, LGBTQ acceptance, that are kind of putting it out to the forefront, right? Saying that we accept folks who align as male or align as female, or who identify this way or express this way.
Yeah.
And that to me is gorgeous. So I think those are ways that we're seeing colleges and institutions help folks in education.
Well, and so I'm glad that you brought it from both perspectives, and that's really what I wanted us to dive into, because the importance of knowledge is power. But more that you have knowledge about who yourself is, right? I was having this conversation with my mother, and we were talking about another individual, and she was asking me questions, and I was like, well, I think they're still trying to identify their full queerness. And that's the whole thing about self-discovery. I think not everybody understands, where they're coming out at, I mean, we have a whole day for that, right?
Yeah.
Where we celebrate this whole coming out. And, for some people that may not be till they're late in their 40s. For some, it might be while they're still in their adolescence. We are not sure where that might be. So let's keep moving forward. Let's talk about to what extent of influence of healthcare inequities that we are seeing that the LGBTQ community might be facing. And again, I know you're not subject matter experts within the healthcare field, but again, you might be able to lend your experiences and what you might be able to share. Who would like to take that first?
I mean, to be honest, like you said, it's one of those that I'm not an expert in. I can only speak to experience. And for me, I think I've seen a lot of where these resources, the funding becomes the important part there. Voting for those who are going to give the funding and who will fight for it. Because it trickles down. If someone is paying bills because they can't afford and they need to survive, or medication, things like this, they're not the person that our industry is trying to capture as a client. And I hate to say it, but it is true. We talk about, you know, masterminds, right? Or we sit in like top producer meetings. You're talking about how do you gain business. They're not worried about that person that cannot afford to buy. And that is sad. And that's why we do these things. We volunteer on these things on the side because we want to tackle all of this, right? I know that even organizations that are real estate related, again, I can only speak to my experience. So the LGBTQ plus Real Estate Alliance on a national level does a lot of work to make sure that we are staying informed, that we are looking at what's going on across the country, and that includes even things that are outside of real estate, because at the end of the day, our clients are our family on so many levels, and that's, you know, I do know it has that correlation for sure.
Well, and what we determine is when you have housing insecurity, you're going to have health challenges.
Yeah.
And so it kind of lines into that. So for Rosa, maybe you can expand on some information there.
So I think that when it comes to, again, healthcare, it's we're looking at what Manny's saying. Housing instability creates a space where you have every other instability, right? But more specifically, and y'all can, I'm a broken record, honey. I'll take it back to black and back to brown, okay? The people assume the HIV crisis is over, for example, and it's not in the black, you know, male for male sector, and the black trans community and the brown trans community. These are issues that are still relevant today as they were yesterday. And I feel like a lot of people don't have the knowledge or the understanding that this work needs to be done. And as Manny talked about, we need more funding. There's lots of organizations doing the work. For example, in Atlanta, there's Positive Impact that works in mostly gay LGBTQ spaces, and within the black and brown communities. We're seeing Destination Tomorrow, I Am Human, all these amazing organizations doing groundwork and spreading the knowledge that these are still issues that are impacting our communities, and they go hand in hand with housing, they go hand in hand with education, they go hand in hand with employment, because if you can't have accessibility to a livable wage, right? And these are the things that when we're talking about voting, when you're hearing candidates talking about things like livable wages, grants, funding, making sure that marginalized communities are getting these funds, these are your key indicators of somebody who knows the humanity of people and who you should be voting for. And I'd like to make sure that it's not just the national level, because it's great if we have a Democratic president. But when we're talking about Douglas County, Douglasville, Tucker, where I live, Atlanta, municipalities, you know, local elections, those are the ones that are really making the difference. Earlier, Amy brought up something about an NDO, and an NDO is a non-discrimination ordinance. Tucker passed one of those to make sure that we had additional protections for black, LGBTQ, immigrant, all sorts of veterans even, different folks from community, right? That was not something that was done on a federal level, but more rather a local level, and we're currently in local elections. Early voting is open around the state, so make sure you look up that on the Secretary of State's website, and that your registration status is okay. But after that little plug.
Let's repeat that part. Make sure your voting status is valid.
Honey, because
Make
we
sure
live
you
in
have
Georgia,
registered.
and you know they like to take people off the
voter rolls, so please
honey.
make sure you have checked that.
So, that said, I think that when we're talking about health inequity, you know, there's a lot of reasons for it, and I'm going to get personal like Manny did really quick and tell y'all. So, as a trans woman who has passing privilege, my entire life I had a childhood doctor, and I went to her until I was in my mid-20s almost, right? Really loved her. She was our family doctor. And, you know, nurses come in and out, PAs come in and out, and one time in my mid-20s, there was a nurse that was in the office who knew I was trans, because it was all through my records and everything was clear. So I was always very forefront about it because I had all that privilege and hadn't really had terrible experiences in healthcare. And I was out at a club. I used to be one of those girls who was like the Jaegerette girl or the Bud Light girl, and go walk around and be like, do you want to buy, you know, a shot? We'll give you a t-shirt, blah, blah, blah. And don't even judge, because it used to pay. I was Tito's girl. But it used to pay like $75 an hour back in the day, and that was a lot of money when I was growing up. Girl, don't let this makeup fool you. I'm 42 years old, okay? That said, I was out in a bar, and some guy hit on me. And he was with a group of 6 friends. And when we talk about personal stories and trauma and how that impacts our lives, this guy hit on me at the time I was dating a guy. I was like, I'm not interested. Oh, thank you so much, but here's your t-shirt, blah, 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 and walked off. My nurse from my doctor's office was there, and there was not another person that I knew in there. And my assumption is 100% that she told those guys that you hit on me, you hit on a trans woman, or you hit on somebody who used to be a boy, blase, blase. The guy walked out, followed me to my car, threw me against my car, choked me out till I almost blacked out, and I thought I was gonna die, and used all sorts of derogatory, racial, and anti-LGBTQ terms. And this is where we see that this trauma impacts our decisions on whether we're open or not. For 8 to 10 years after that, I saw multiple doctors, and I would never tell them I was trans. When did you have your period? Oh, girl, it was on the 1st through the 6th. It was a heavy flow, blah, blah, blah. I am not doing this again, right? Like, I don't want to be put in this position. I'm 5'4.5", and at the time, I was 120 pounds, soft and wet. Not anymore. That said, I didn't want to be in a place where it was like, oh my God, somebody is going to kill me because you don't know what is okay to tell somebody and not tell somebody.
Yeah.
And let me preface this with, I would have told him anyways.
Yeah.
That's the funny thing. At the time, I was pre-op. So what am I going to do, not tell him?
It's a scary situation.
Taking that right out of somebody's hands, taking it out of somebody LGBTQ's hands, outing somebody, putting people in danger. We lost in 2022 40 black and brown, predominantly black trans women to transphobic murders. So we can't really, you know, these conversations about, oh, you know, trans women are tricking men, this, that, all these transphobic things that are happening around the country, from athlete bills to somebody's gonna assault my child in a bathroom, which has never happened, by the way. And statistically, white cis men are the most likely to assault your children. That being said, when we're looking at this media coverage, this whole build up of, you know, anti-trans, anti-TGX stuff, it's something that's pervasive that actually affects lives, and that's why I'm telling y'all that story, is because people don't really understand how that can change your whole life, right? I didn't get my A1Cs diagnosed. I didn't like going to doctors. I didn't know that I was almost pre-diabetic because these things affected me. So when you're talking about a brown, you know, gay man having a terrible experience, or a black lesbian having a horrible experience with a healthcare provider who's not affirming, who does not know the terminology, and has one bad experience, that is why we see further down the road, 20 years down, right, LGBTQ people of color dying at higher rates than we do within the cis and white community. But that's something that we have to change as a society.
So it really
Girl, I'm
does.
gonna get my-
No, and I love this deep dive, because that's what we needed. Because it's important to making sure that professionals in the community, it can't just be about the residents or who's going to be that consumer. It also has to be the business owners that's in the community. It has to also be elected officials that are in the community, because you really need to making sure, or even teachers, you want to make sure that people can see, they can have someone to identify with. Because, you know, if you were by yourself, if it was that doctor, you know, how long did it take before you could find a doctor that felt comfortable to making sure you saw the best in healthcare? I mean, I grapple with that challenge just as a black woman, and you know, just finding healthcare that might have something available on this side.
Maternal mortality rates in your community.
Yeah.
Girl,
Oh, absolutely.
Georgia has one of the highest maternal mortality rates for black women, and this is
54%.
cis black women in the country. Sometimes at the level of third world countries. I mean, we are in America, and these are not conversations we should be having to have in 2023. Why black, brown, LGBTQ folks, Latinx folks, Asian folks, and all these other folks deserve the same equitable access to health care that other folks do. And when you're looking at what the reasonings are for it, what else is there? We're all people, we're all women, we're all men, we're all, you know, folks. I'm assuming race has something to do with it.
Race has something to do with it when we look at based on your zip code as of right now. And it's one of the reasons why I'm big on advocating fair housing is essential for a community to thrive, because it does dictate your education. It does dictate the financial institutions that come to your community, the way that the way the transportation, the get around in your community. I mean, even the school being funded by your property taxes. So
education,
it-
the healthcare, it
all
all
of it.
is one big trickle down. And I'm glad we are having these conversations and that you're watching it and that we'll be able to share this, because that is also the problem. These are your neighbors.
Yeah.
These are your students if you're a professor. They're going through this, you know. These are our clients as real estate agents. When I come through their house, they already took down their wedding photos. I didn't even know they went through that.
Yeah.
Unless we're having these conversations and people are sharing.
You know, you touched right there on it, because now as I go into people's homes and we talk about, like, they're even more aware of it. Oh my God, do I need to remove these pictures? Do I need to get this out? You know, I am more about allowing people to be themselves. You know what I mean? And that's what we have to start normalizing, allowing people to be themselves. That should be the normal part. Rather than hiding who you are. Let the cowards hide. But just on a quick note, I am still smelling these wings. You know, as a vegan, I wish they were cauliflower, but you know, they are smelling very vibrant. So I hope everyone's getting an opportunity, and please thank the wait staff that is here. And again, I want to say a special thanks to Tito's Lounge for sponsoring us this evening with the Democratic Party of Douglas County. And so, speaking of which, Tito's does live music on Saturdays. I know, right? What? So make sure you come out on Saturdays.
You know I'm on the other side of town.
I know, but
I'll
you
come
can
over here.
drive
I
out
can
here.
stay
You
over
can
at
drive
your
out here and
house.
come hang out with
I'll
me.
stay over at your place.
You can hang out with me. He did tell me they got some cauliflower back there, so I'm trying to get him on some menu expansions. So let's dive into, as we've been talking about voting. Woo, woo, woo. Do you believe the LGBTQ community enjoys ample representation in shaping voting policies? And what steps can be taken to guarantee that perspectives of LGBTQ individuals resonate, particularly in matters affecting housing and healthcare legislation?
That was another long one.
That was another
long one, I know. Well, I'll start off by saying, you know, again, and it comes down to not forgetting that as the homeowner that works hard and goes into work every day and is just trying to figure out how to spend good time with your family, you still have a voice, you still have a vote, you still can make change. I think we forget that a lot, or we get jaded. Funny enough, I'm a political science major back in college. I do nothing in that space now, but even for me, there's times that I go, man, do I even want to watch the news today? Do I want to read up on this matter? Do I need to add this to my life? And the answer is yes, we need to. We need to find the ways that we do this. But I do think we can make that change. We've talked about a couple local issues, local changes that happen, but advocating to your representatives, to your senators, all of this is important. I get to do it with some of the organizations that I am part of. I used to be past president of the National Association of Hispanic Real Estate Professionals. That was the first organization that I joined where they took me to Washington, and I got to sit in front of my representative, in front of a senator, and tell them my story. And as I grew up and I matured, my story in front of them changed, because I realized sometimes we have to come at it with heart, but sometimes we got to come at it with statistics, with facts and truth, which we've been throwing out there a lot today. But taking these factoids, taking this, if you're a little bit of a nerd like me, doing the research, but these organizations are getting in front of these representatives and senators, and they do listen. They are listening to you. It is a long game, as has been mentioned. It's a long game, and it's not an easy one. But, you know, we have to put in that work. So I think that's the best way to do it.
Are we being represented? Represented? No, absolutely not. I do not think that we're being represented. I think that we're working towards those progresses. So I don't want to be the negative Nelly again. I think that there's lots of strides we're seeing. We see my good friend and sister House of Representatives, Park Hannon. We see Sam Park in Gwinnett County representing the Asian queer community. I love it. We see, Liliana Bakhtiari for the Atlanta City Council, first non-binary TGX person elected to city council. These are just our local folks. When we're looking on the national level, we're seeing folks like, Pete Buttigieg and his husband Chasten We're seeing Donica Rome in Virginia. I think she's local to Virginia as well. Sarah McBride, who's a trans woman, worked with HRC for a long time as a state senator. Are we seeing more representation? Yes. When I look at who I see on TV, what represents us as a whole, as a country right now, I still feel like it's unrepresentative of America as a whole, whether that's the Black, Brown, Asian, Latinx, LGBTQ communities. I think that we have an overrepresentation of older white cis folks, and I think that a lot of these folks, regardless of their background, they're starting to get a little out of touch.
Yeah.
Honey, when we saw the whole situation with Taylor Swift and Ticketmaster, was when I was like, oh my God, these people even don't know what Ticketmaster is, right? And why all these young kids, these millennials, these folks who are going out and the issues that matter to them, I don't think are being represented as a whole, which is why I wholeheartedly support term limits when we're looking at politics. From the perspective of anyone local all the way up to the federal level. I also think that, as much as I love the Democratic Party and have knocked doors, thousands of doors in DeKalb County on the last 3 rounds, whether that was Stacey, John Ossoff, Warnock, or Biden, to get the vote out, it's getting harder and harder to energize folks when our federal elections or our local elections are unrepresentative of us from an age perspective. And I bless his heart, I feel like Biden wouldn't have run this time if Trump didn't come back into the circle. But I think that we need people who look more like us, who feel more like us, that we're more connected to re-energize that base and make sure that people in our groups feel more representative. When we see that in action and we see people like Imani Barnes in my DeKalb County, representing me, I feel like it gives me hope, right? And energy. And when marginalized communities feel that hope and that energy, it gets more folks to be motivated to run, which in turn changes the demographic of what things look like. So when we say, hashtag representation matters, to me it really does, because I feel like when I see somebody who's TGX, or I'm sure when Manny sees somebody who's Latinx, or, you see somebody who's a Black woman in power, then you're like, oh, okay, let me reclaim my time.
That's right. Well, even to that point, because I'm all about reclaiming some time. What does that? So, okay, I'm going to come back to it because I want to phrase it in the right way.
Okay.
Because we are coming up to a very important election. Again, it cannot always be about the presidential election. It's about our local election. And making sure that you take the time to get informed with the candidates that are running. Because, see, for me, I'm not just a words person. Anybody who knows Amy McCoy, and I'm going to talk about myself in third person. Yeah, y'all heard it. But it really comes down to actions for me. I'm an actions-oriented person. I'm results driven. So I look at who has been out there on the front line actually putting in the work, not just talking about it, because we've heard political commentary before, oh, housing, but then when housing comes on the ballot, when it's time to really make housing policies for equitable and even affordable options, for somehow it's always left off out of the conversation when it's time to really vote. And so that's what has me biggest concern for it. What do you guys think on that?
So I think that personally, again, this is something, I am entrenched in political advocacy, social justice advocacy, racial advocacy, LGBTQ advocacy. She is very intersectional. But for me, one of the things that I've noticed is that why I think Amy and Manny and I would ask you to vote more specifically in your municipalities and your local elections than your federal elections is because often those local city councils have things like NPUs that are taking care of zoning and housing and parks and recreation, beautification, safety. All the things that really matter to you day to day are going to be done by your local elected officials. It's not going to be something that Biden or Trump is passing down. These are things that are being activated on a local level. Sometimes we had one election, I want to say in the last cycle, that was determined by one vote. Was it one vote? Right?
not too far
I
off
think
on it.
so. Maybe one vote locally, which is all the world of difference in making sure that somebody gets into office versus somebody not getting into office. And we find that in the Democratic community, at least in my general view of it, we find that people often get really energized for statewide elections, or we see that they get very energized for federal elections, but we don't see that same energy or that drive to get out voter turnout for local elections. And I think that it's really important that when you're putting in the energy of getting out the vote, the things that are going to impact you the most is your local municipality. Who is your city council person? Who is your city mayor? Are they willing to sign NDOs? What are they doing for budgeting? Your property taxes are not determined by the federal government. They're determined by your local municipality. So when me and Manny are out and we're looking at, and you selling property, buying property, what does your estimated monthly payment look like? All of these things are affected locally, and people forget that. They get so bought into the left versus the right, and Democrats versus Republicans, and Biden versus Trump, that's all you're seeing, and you're not really focusing on the micro levels of what political impact looks like, if that makes sense.
Absolutely, and and that right there is a big part to that. When you're out looking at the properties and to try and determine, is it still affordable, and what might have made it unaffordable could have been the property taxes. So then, and that's one thing, but home ownership does create real community stakeholdership. It's not so much that a renter is not going to have the same type of engagement, but when you're paying a tune of $5,000 and above in your property taxes, and you are wondering why you're passing those same potholes, or you're not seeing the same level of service from one side of a community than the other, it makes you question those things. And so, that's why we're big proponents and advocate very hard for ownership, because now you can hold somebody accountable. And in turn, that community is going to hold that owner accountable in making sure that that property is maintained in order to sustain its values. But most importantly, we're making sure that we're sustaining a candidate that is also thinking the same level to that. As we're getting ready to come to a close, did you guys have anything to expand on that before we go to these last two questions?
I just wanted to add, I mentioned it earlier, that long game, right? You have to get comfortable with that idea. At that, level, when we talk about the federal level, there's a long game. But y'all have emphasized so much the value of doing your being an active member of society, going out and voting in your locals. I'll tell you, there's an interesting, for some reason this stat keeps coming back to me as we're talking about this. You need to find what motivates you, right? For me, one of those was when I learned that as Latinos, there was this excitement on this federal level, at this national conference I was at, about this stat that came out that in about 15 to 20 years, Latinos will be the majority of the first-time homebuyer. And that was exciting. And then I got back home and I started dealing with my clients, and I go, what if when that finally happens, and this thing that got me all fired up, what if when that finally happens, there's no sustainable homes to sell? There's no affordable homes to sell. And that is going to be up to our local level to look at builders, who's supporting who, what type of construction's being done. So again, that local level, it all coincides. We have to keep working on both ends. Just wanted to add that too.
And I want to add one more thing.
Yes.
So y'all only got us one.
I can't wait to add on. Go ahead,
So to me, when I'm talking about NPUs and your local city council, these are the things. So for example, we have an enormous amount of renters in the Atlanta area. We have a lot of renters that want to jump into the housing market, but they don't have the ability to save the funds they need to put down a down payment or to pay their debt off because rent rates are so high. Not having rental caps affordable projects through City of Atlanta or through City of Douglasville or things like that. Those are very impactful. But additionally, the smallest things like Airbnbs and having caps on how many homes somebody can own as Airbnbs. We see a lot of investment from overseas right now into our real estate markets, especially in Atlanta. And then we see a lot of investors coming in from California and buying up these properties and
Buying
then
neighborhoods.
buying
They're
whole
buying
neighborhoods, right? Those kinds of things are often passed again on a local level. So just putting that little tidbit in there too. Go get out and vote.
Well, and because HUD just released yesterday expansions for FHA, and I'm coming in going to be chair of federal finance and housing policy for NAR, so it's very big being kind of in the know of what's happening with FHA, VA, USDA, and things of that sort. So HUD finally releases yesterday expanding more for FHA loans, ADUs, and that's big. Something we've been advocating very hard here in Douglas County and in Douglasville was square footage minimums being removed. Unfortunately, they only came down a little bit, but just think of how progressive it could have been. We look at examples of Brookhaven when Brookhaven came online, right? When it became their own city, and how they became their own city is very controversial because they removed the pre-clearance of the 1965 Voting Rights Act law in order to create its own city. But it took the lead in creating ADUs for its homes. And so now where you
What
have...
are ADUs?
Oh, I'm sorry. You know what? Thank you.
Sorry.
Right.
ADUs are accessory dwelling units. Speaking like, say you have a guest house that's at the back of your house. I live in the Tributary. I actually have an apartment that's over my garage, but out of the entire 900 homes in that community, maybe less than 10 even offer that as an opportunity. But having this expansion, this availability for FHA borrowers, because now 75% of the income that could be utilized that could come from that accessory dwelling unit could be counted towards income for an FHA buyer. So now that's expanding opportunity for affordability for people to become homeowners using the FHA model. But when we're not building those as options, yeah, or even providing that as a rental solution for communities that are facing affordability challenges or even access to housing opportunities, is something we should definitely be looking closer at. So I'm going to go ahead and move to the next one. Navigating, and this one's a big one, y'all, so I'm glad we're getting ready to come to an end because it's very controversial. Okay? Navigating the intricate landscapes of LGBTQ community acceptance and religion in American society. How do challenges of the LGBTQ identities and religious beliefs shape the fabric of our society today? And what paths forward can foster greater understanding and harmony?
You want me to go first? Oh, Lord. Okay, I am a Muslim woman. I identify as Muslim, in addition to being a daughter of Indian immigrants, being brown, being trans, all the other intersections. I'm effectively the anti-Trump, so vote for me when I run. That being said...
I love it. Vote for Rosa.
The announcement was here.
I'm just joking. I'm not running. That said, I think that a lot of LGBTQ folks are made to choose between our existence and our religion. So often what I do when I'm going out and speaking about this topic to folks is to remind people that, a lot of LGBTQ folks aren't godless or faithless. It's almost like we're driven from our religions because we have to make these choices of, do I want to live? Do I want to survive? And who am I? Because how we teach religion, whether that is Islam, Christianity, Judaism, most major monotheistic religions, or polytheistic religions, even within some of those, it's more of a cultural issue that we're seeing on acceptance. Earlier in the conversation, I said that 40 to 60% of unhoused youth happen to be LGBTQ. Well, the vast majority of those people were thrown out of their homes because of being LGBTQ, because their families don't find that it's acceptable because of organized religion. I'm more of a spiritual person. I know that God created me in my life. I am beautiful. I am living my life. I am successful. I am happy. And I shine light and love wherever I go. And I feel like LGBTQ people, the vast majority of LGBTQ people I know, have that. I think there's something to be said for the experiences that we experience when we're younger that house how we interact with society. And people that have been through trauma and toxicity and the things that LGBTQ folks have been through often shape people who are very loving, very accepting. And when you go out in our community, you will find that. Pride was an amazing opportunity this weekend to experience that kind of love, right? Yeah. That said, I don't believe that a God, any God, creates hate and division. And then this is something that we're seeing so much of right now in this country between the Israeli conflict and Hamas and Muslims and Jews and Christians. And I don't believe that that's the basis of religion. I believe the basis of religion is love, loving God, loving one another, sharing joy, kindness, and accessibility and equity in life for everyone. When we look at our prophets, whether that's Prophet Muhammad, peace be upon him, Isa salam is Jesus, Musa salam is Moses for us. All of these people hung out with the most marginalized communities, the poor, the unhoused, sex workers, people of color, and spread their love and light for God throughout these communities. So I think that sometimes we have this tendency to twist religion in the name of power, inequity, land, whatever it may be, to serve our own needs. And when we really look at those who are truly of God, those people, we're surrounded by people that are sitting on the sofa.
That's right.
Yeah.
That's right. Manny, what you think?
I'm going to take it back a little bit to how we started here. I believe, Amy, you said, we got to remember that we are all part of this LGBTQ plus, right? I really stress that plus as well because it is allies, right? Those are my neighbors. For me, I have a personal story, I can share it another time. I've shared it before, but, in my coming out story, there was this weird twist to it where the unexpected was that I'm Catholic, grew up Catholic, our priest, family priest, is the one that ended up kind of talking my mom down from the, oh my God, my child is gay, to, has Manny been anything different than the person that I've broken bread with for the last, 10 years, 15 years that we've known him? No. So therefore, there's your answer, right? And I run an office in a very diverse area of Atlanta with 250 plus agents. And what I've realized is Decatur, by the way, love some Decatur, love some Decatur. But no, it's a very open, city. It's a very open group, but we don't have these conversations often. Mm-hmm. We don't talk about religion. We've been brought up not to. We can't afford not to talk about these things anymore. I think that's how I feel is we are now in a place where it's either you are religious and you hate, or you're religious and you don't and you're accepted. It's not like that. We can have these conversations, and I think that that's what resounded with that question to me is there is hope for it. We have to put it out there. We have to share our stories.
Yeah. So I'm right before we get ready to conclude, because we want to say thank you for the Douglas County Democrats. But thank you, special thank you to Tito's. We're going to leave out on this last question. And I know we
and
just
how much
went
time
a little
do
bit.
we have to answer?
Look, we already went over just
Oh,
a few,
okay.
few
Sorry,
minutes.
guys.
But I think this is the most important question of all.
Okay.
So I hope y'all
I'll
are
try
listening.
to make my answer short.
Hope you're listening.
I talk a lot.
How can allies provide the most effective support for the LGBTQ community? And individuals struggle with equitable housing, healthcare, or vital services. What could be a potential singular policy modification, if you want to even go to that far, that could make the most significant impact?
On a personal level, speak up and speak out when you see hatred, okay? We need more people to utilize their voice. On a level of an action item, find local Black, brown, trans-led, LGBTQ-led organizations that are doing the work in your municipality, in your area, that you can fund, because those are the people who are actually going to bat helping the communities that are the most marginalized.
Yeah.
That's facts.
I mean, you said the first two things that came to mind. I'll just go straight up to not every restaurant, lounge would allow us to have this conversation here
Facts.
the way that Tito's has. And it's that simple. It's that it's that close to you. It's, like you said, supporting those businesses. But then when we talk about the vote, whether it's local or federal, then taking that vote and really studying who you're voting for.
Yeah.
You know, don't just vote because your parent said to vote this way. Don't just vote because your pastor told you to vote this way, because the majority of the church votes this way, or because at the cooler, you know, at work, someone mentioned this one thing. Really examine it, because all those things come down, and that moment will shine, and it can go the way that you'd like it to, or it can go the way that you go, oh wow, didn't ask that question, and guess what? Now I realize that that vote had a consequence. Because like we talked about, sometimes it comes down to one vote, or sometimes it comes down to who appointed someone at the Supreme Court level, and how do we get ourselves through that. So it's at all levels, but we gotta keep that conversation open.
That was a mouthful right there, for real. So I'm gonna go ahead and pass over to Robin. Thank you so much.
I really want to thank our panelists. Thank you for being here. It was a
Absolutely.
great discussion. Really, really added to the conversation that we really need to have. So thank you for being here. I want to remind people to come out to Tito's Lounge.
Yes.
Amy did a great job of promoting them. We really love them. They've been great to us, and their food is excellent.
I'm about to
Please
eat.
come out. And I wanted to remind everybody that next month we will have another Black Men's Roundtable featuring the Douglas County Committee members. So please come out to that, and we will let you know soon where that's going to be and when. So,
Thanks
Oh,
for
and they
having
got T-shirts for sale, y'all.
yes, and we have T-shirts for sale. Please go to the dcdems.org website to buy our swag.
And I'll throw out there too, and just a reminder, we are people that are out here in the community. I would love if we can just, if y'all are open to it, I'm pretty sure they are. We just want to share our names. You can find us, and we'd love to continue these conversations.
Yeah,
We've talked about
absolutely.
these combos. We'd love to continue these. So Manny Racinos, if you'd like to reach out, you can find me on socials.
Feroza Syed, Feroza, last name Syed.
Amy McCoy, VATL Realtor.
The real McCoy.
And they
There you
gave
go.
me another idea. They said to reach out to local organizations.
Yes.
We will put together a list for you, so you know who to support in the Douglas County community.
Yes.
And make sure you go check your voting status. Make sure you get out to vote. Early voting
And
starts.
early voting has already started
begun.
for the municipal elections, and I noticed that they made a big point that it is the local elections that
That's
really
where it
can
matters.
be very, very important. So,
Thank you again for having us.
Yes,
well, thank you for being here.
Appreciate it.
Thank you.